Hello, this is Minter Chen. I'm professor of Management Information Systems at Smith School of Business Economics at CSU Channel Island. In this lecture, we're going to talk about decision making. In our POLC framework, you can find that decision making is listed under leading category, which means leaders make decision. Or in our view, leaders facilitate a group of people in making effective decisions for the organization. So definitely people are involved, and there's a process that we can follow. The learning objective for this unit is to understand the meaning of decision making, understand condition affect decision making, describe different decision-making model and process, and also understand the role of creativity in managerial decision-making, as well understand the group decision-making issue and process. Here's a short definition of decision-making. Decision-making refers to selecting choices among alternative course of action, which may include certainly not taking any action. Increasing effectiveness in decision-making is an important part of maximizing the effectiveness at work. Psychologists study decision-making and treat decision-making as a cognitive process that results in the selection of a course of action among several alternative possibilities. Every decision-making process eventually produces a final choice, which may or may not prompt actions. Decision-making is a process. We mentioned the concept process again and again. That the process of identifying, choosing alternative based on your values, preferences, and beliefs of the decision maker or decision makers. Decisions are everywhere. In your planning process, you need to make decisions. When you try to design your organization, there's different organizational structures or form that you need to decide. And leading certainly is a big part of the area where decision making capability of a leader is considered a very important attribute for a great leader. In controlling, you need to decide whether the performance is meeting the standard and expectation, and you have to decide the corrective action when it's needed. And decisions can be made at different levels. There are high-level strategic importance strategic decisions, which set course of an organization. It could be at the middle level, the technical decision. Those are the decisions about how things will get done. And at the front line, the operational level, we make operational decisions that employee, particularly the frontline employee, need to make on daily basis. For instance, whether to accept return goods in the retail store depends on the situation. And this is a table showing that the strategic decision, tactic decisions, and operational decisions and at different level of organization and who may be involved in making, say, strategic decisions. For instance, the CEO, board of director, and top management team may be involved in strategic decision. For instance, a merge acquisition decisions, a new product development decision, or whether the organization should downsize, upsize, or re-engineer. Middle level manager tends to make decisions such as if the top level manager decided to downsize, then the lower level, middle level manager need to decide who should be let go when the company need to downsize. The operational decisions are made by employees throughout the organizations. And for instance, how to communicate with your coworker, what to say to the customer about a new product, and etc. When making decisions, you need to consider your time constraints. You need to determine the importance of decision to be made and prioritize them. You also need to collect necessary information to understand the context and the issue or requirement involved in the decision to be made. But be aware there's so-called search cost involved, and you have to consider this to limit the effort in acquiring and analyzing the needed informations. And another important thing is to consider who should get involved. Sometimes it's nice to get people involved, but when you have too many people involved, then probably no decision can be made, because you will have so many different opinions, and then people fight with each others. And once you make a decision, you certainly hope the decision will be implemented successfully. So you want to make your decision stick, which is really an implementation issue of a decision, and how to carry out, how to sell and implement your decision. Selling the solution or the outcome of the decision required good communication and explanation of your decision to the stakeholder. There's a ethical and legal aspect of decision making. Here are some questions that you should ask yourself when you make important decisions, such as, is the decision fair to all parties involved? Is the decision making process transparent? For instance, like in hiring a new faculty member, does the search committee actually has a pretty transparent decision-making process and criteria, and seeking input from all parties involved in the search process. And you need to ask yourself, would I feel better about yourself after you make the decision, which means your conscience is clear. And does the decision break any organization rules or policy? Or even further, does this decision break any law or regulation? Or maybe we can even ask the question, does the decision break any value or belief or assumption of the organization in terms of its culture? And the last question is something you should always ask, particularly if you're top-level management or politicians, and which is, how would I feel if this decision was leaked to the press or social media? We classify decision into programmed decision or non-programmed decision. Non-programmed decisions are we'll explain that a little bit. Program decisions are pretty straightforward, that you know the decision rule. You can almost automate the process in terms of formulating policies, setting decision rules, decision tree, or actually code it as an algorithm in programs. It may save you time and effort in making such decisions, which may occur quite frequently, and therefore it's it's a good idea to figure out how you should deal with it on a daily basis. An example, for instance, for graduate school to make decision in terms of selecting applicants, we may set rules such as like the students has to have certain GPA, meeting certain GPA standards, say above 3, or the GRE score has to be above some level, and or some evidence of research experience or working experience at a more managerial position. And once you know it's a program decision and it's the occur frequently, you don't want to waste the time in making decision for each one of them, then you need to figure out what are the rules such that it can be encoded in your policy book and employee handbook, or coded as an algorithm in your software, such that they can be applied more easily, either through software or through just people following the rule book. Non-program decisions are unique. It may not happen that often. Therefore, it requires conscious thinking. You need to gather information and carefully consider various alternatives. So it takes time and effort to make such non-programmed decisions. In this lecture, our focus is pretty much on the non-programmed decisions. And for instance, once the decision rule have eliminated most of the graduate school candidates admissions, the admission committee looks at all the detail of the applicant who passed that threshold, and to rank the applicant. This part is kind of non-program portion of the decision making. There are several type of decision making model. The first one is what we call rational decision making. The rational decision making model, there's a process that the decision maker will evaluate various alternatives and eventually make a choice and try to find out the best alternative and to implement the alternative chosen. But before you come up with various alternatives, you may want to also come up with a set of criteria that for your decision making, including the weights assigned to each of the criteria. So if we start from the beginning, you want to investigate and frame and define the problem, come up with the decision criteria, assign weights to the criteria, and then identify, create, or develop various alternatives in solving a particular problem. The 2 and 3 probably can occur concurrently or maybe even after step 4. And eventually you will evaluate the alternative against the criteria. So based on 2 to 4, then select the best alternative, the so-called best alternative, and eventually try to figure out how to implement it and evaluate the decisions or the outcome of decisions, or even the decision-making process. Sometimes this is called post-mortem. And this rational decision model is very similar to the creative problem-solving process model, which we will discuss in our second online lecture. Common criteria in evaluating alternative include cost, benefit, risk, and a few others criteria, such as how easy or difficult it is to implement the alternative. Certainly this involves cost and risk. and what's the impact of this to employees' morale and or to impact to our sales and market share. How about the return on investment? And also whether this is going to encroach on our existing product if you're talking about making decision in new product development. So I would say the three key criteria will be cost, benefit, and I will throw in risk as the three major criteria that you will consider. And certainly you can add any criteria that you think that is important in evaluating the alternatives. There's some flaws of the rational decision model. They assume that people understand what the decision is all about. They have the time and effort to come up with all the alternative and try to come up. All the alternative can be very expensive and costly and may not be even possible. And also we assume that the people have no cognitive bias. We assume that the people want to make optimal decisions, and which may not be totally true. It's not that we don't want optimal decision or the best solution just because it may take too much time and effort to do so. And we assume that people will follow such ideal decision-making process. A lot of time people don't. People make decision pretty much on the spot instead of going through this rigorous, rational decision-making process. And also that we assume there's no hidden agenda for all the parties involved. One possible barrier for such rational decision-making is what I called analysis paralysis. Which means that people spend a lot of time trying to analyze the requirement, the constraints, and collecting all the facts and find out there's more to be understood, and therefore spend so much time in analyzing a situation before they make the decision. And by the time they finish the analysis phase, the decision may no longer be relevant. And this is because a lot of time there's a time pressure in terms of decision making, and we have limited time and other resources in going through this comprehensive rational decision making process. Therefore, Herb Simon, which is a Nobel Prize winner in economics and also known in decision-making, artificial intelligence, came up with a theory called bounded rationality to explain what really happened in decision-making for most of the people. The bounded rationality means the rationality of individual is limited by the information they have, and they also have cognitive limitation of their mind or cognitive capacity. They have finite amount of time they have to make a decision. Individual knowingly limit their option or choice of an acceptable alternative, not the best alternative, but acceptable alternative, without conducting exhausted search for alternative, because there may be high search costs involved in coming up all the possible alternative. So instead of come up with the optimal solutions, satisficing is the term we use. Satisfies refer to accepting a good enough alternative that meets minimum criteria, which means as long as some alternative meet the minimum criteria, then you probably should stop searching for a better alternative, which usually means that good enough is enough in making a decision. So it is important you come up with some minimum requirement or minimum criteria in accepting alternative. And once the criteria has been met, and then you we call it satisficing. You come up with a satisficing solution, and that's good enough, and you should stop and move the decision forward. In some situation that we will make decision based on our intuition. Sometimes we managers make decision based on their gut feeling because rational analysis has its limit. And there's certain conditions that favor actually intuitive decision making. A lot of people actually trust their intuitions, like they have that sixth sense. And a lot of time they may be right in terms of listen to their own sixth sense. And this is the condition that favor intuitive decision making include high level of uncertainty, and there's not much of precedence that you can draw on to help you to understand the situations, the variable impacting the decision are difficult to predict in terms of its impact. There's not much facts out there for you to collect. And even you have facts, they may not pointing to the way where how you may solve the problem. And not much of an analytical data, or even you have the data, it may not tell you much. There's not much insight in the data. And so those are the situations that intuitive decision making may be something you want to consider. And another decision making style or model is creative decision making process, which follow the following steps. Problem recognition, recognize there's a problem. Immersion, which means immerse yourself to understand the problem, have deeper understanding of the problem, understand the root causes of the problem. Incubation, which means a lot of time if it's tricky, or sometimes we call it wiki problem, that it may not be easy to solve in a short period of time, then you may want to give it an incubation period, which means let the problem sit, constantly thinking about it, and eventually you may move to an illumination stage, which is which like the light bulb certainly light up, like Archimedes that try to figure out how to measure whether the crown of the king was made by the blacksmith was made in pure gold, and eventually he figured out while taking the bath, and we call that Eureka moment. It doesn't mean that you're taking a bath and you come up with some great idea. You have to actually immerse yourself, and then also go through that incubation period, and then this illumination may come sometime at the moment that you don't expect it. But once you come up with some creative idea, you still need to go through a verification and application phase to verify whether that's really a good idea, because a lot of idea will come up with, we can all consider that's a great idea, but you need to go through a verification and the application of the idea or implementation of the idea to prove its worthiness. So if we summarize the four different decision-making approaches, there's a rational approach, bounded rationality approach, an intuitive decision-making approach, and the creative decision-making approach. And here we list various situations where certain approach may be more appropriate than other. And once again, this is kind of a contingency theory, which means there's no best decision-making approach. It all depends on the situation in terms of search costs, time pressures, whether you're dealing with something that's brand new and innovative, and how important the decision is, and whether the alternative can be easily identified and figured out. Then you decide which approach may be the best. Sometimes I believe you could combine more than several approach in dealing with a problem. Okay, so this concludes our first part of the decision-making lectures. I will see you next time.